I want to bring in attorney Dan Schorr, Dan, former prosecutor. All right, let's talk about the defense's case here and what their contention, Dan, is this, that Vashti Seacat was depressed. Are they doing a good job laying the groundwork with the brother telling the Easter egg story? And then today we get testimony from someone who, is prescribing this HCG diet, and maybe that's caused some depression for Vashti Seacat.
They're trying to show that she was depressed and therefore committed suicide, but there's a lot of problems with the way they're going about it. First of all, this is all people giving their take on what might have happened. It's very questionable. We don't have any hard evidence that she was really thinking of killing herself. Maybe she was depressed from this medication. Maybe she seemed upset when she was talking to other people. But that is nothing compared to the hard evidence connecting the defendant to this case. The fact that, according to the victim here who died, he was threatening to kill her prior to that. And the way she died is so inconsistent with the way people tend to kill themselves, that she was shot in the head, in the neck, in her bed, that there was a fire that burned down her house that started in multiple spots in the house. There's a supposed suicide note, and this defendant was seen practicing forgery of documents the day before at work, and he was a crime scene investigator. He had a PowerPoint display at his house that talked about investigations that dealt with fires and suicides versus homicides, and there's so much connecting this to a plan by the defendant. So these suggestions here and there that maybe she was depressed, maybe she thought about killing herself, it's really not very powerful when you look at the totality of the evidence against this defendant.
Real quick, Dan, and we'll talk through the afternoon, of course. Does he have to take the stand? Is that his best hope?
It's always very risky to take the stand for any defendant, but here, if he doesn't give his version of events, it's hard to see how the jury can find reasonable doubt. So I would expect him to take the stand. The defense attorney has suggested he will take the stand, although that doesn't mean he will. But it seems to be that he will have to if he wants any hope of getting acquitted here.
Okay, and we'll continue with Dan, a great expert insight throughout the afternoon. And we're waiting. If he does take the stand, we'll take you right to the drum inside that Kansas courtroom. We're also keeping you updated on Jodi Arias. Brand new statement from her attorneys, Kirk Nurmi, Jennifer Wilmot. Will she escape the death penalty? They're basically saying, hey, the state says she's mentally ill. So she's mentally ill with no criminal record. You really want to execute her? More coming up. All right, Dan, concerning Jodi Arias and whether or not because basically the district attorney's office said, okay, it's their duty to listen to offers if there's something from the defense. They're not saying they're going to take them. What do you see coming down the pike? Do you think they'll take death off the table and entertain some deal or not?
It's possible. It's probably going to come down to what the family wants, because the prosecutor here, Juan Martinez, is not the type to back down. And if the family wants to go through this again, and I mean the family of the victim here, then the prosecutor's probably going to go for the death penalty again. However, it's going to be very, very difficult emotionally to see all this evidence presented again in another death penalty phase. You'll have to see all the evidence about the killing of Travis Alexander, probably autopsy photos. And it's possible the family will say at this point that they don't want to go any further, and they'd be able to work out a deal with Jodi Arias that she would spend life in prison, no possibility of parole, and no right to appeal. But if the family wants to go forward and pursue this, I'd be surprised if the prosecution backs down.
Okay, so you're saying the possible deal in there would be life, no parole, and also you don't pursue appeals. That's what. But with Jodi Arias, she might want to fight the fight and take her chance with some kind of appeal down the road. But real quick thought on that, Dan.
She doesn't gain much from, if she's offered that deal, she doesn't gain much from fighting against it, because the best that she can end up with is being eligible for parole after 25 years if the judge gives her that. And she might not even get that if she's not given the death penalty. The judge can still give her life in prison without any possibility of parole. So she doesn't have much to gain. She could spare her life by making such a deal. And if she's interested in that, she's gone back and forth, at least in her public statements, then she'd probably pursue a deal like that.
Hey, real quick, want to hit George Zimmerman. Huge hearing tomorrow, potentially another one Friday, but they may get all the business taken care of tomorrow. I think the headline here, Dan, is voice identification expert. Is that good science? That's part of a Fry hearing. Do you think that's going to be let in? Whether or not they can decide on that 911 call who is yelling for help, George Zimmerman or Trayvon Martin?
It probably will be let in, although you'd have to see how the hearing progresses. But remember, there's two different things. One is admissibility, whether it comes in, and then one is the weight of the evidence, whether it's persuasive to the jury. So just because they allow one expert to come in to say that he's hearing certain things on this audio tape, if the defense disputes that, and if the jury doesn't hear it or believe it, then it won't make much of a difference in the end. So the prosecution has to not only get it admitted into evidence, they also have to convince a jury that it's credible evidence.
Right. And The defense will probably have their own expert as well, because I believe the FBI tried and could not decide whose voice is on there. Dan, thanks so much. All right, we're staying on top again of the Brett Seacat case. Here's a man. He is charged with murdering his wife, Vashti Seacat. His contention, she was depressed, committed suicide. The state says no, this was murder. More coming up. Stay with us. Back with us, though, our expert, Dan Schorr, former prosecutor, great attorney. All right, Dan, let's talk about some of the different pieces of evidence, and I think you've highlighted a lot of them. Let's talk about what we've heard today. You get a diet plan talked about, HCG. It's a hormone that's produced during pregnancy, that Vashti was on this. And what's the defense's plan there? You just want to get that out there? Even though they can't talk about it causing depression, do you just want to get that information out there for a jury?
Well, obviously their goal is to try to show that it led to depression, even though if they're not allowed to right now overtly say that. But it's really unclear how this is helpful for them if they can't make that connection, because their argument is that Vashti killed herself and they have to show some reason that she killed herself, that she was depressed, that maybe this drug made her depressed. But they're having a hard time getting any evidence that's really helpful to prove that to the jury.
You know, and another thing that you had mentioned, we talked about as well in this program, you know, we see this gun. It was in court yesterday, a forensics expert holding this big, dirty, hairy Clint Eastwood-style gun, and you're thinking, wow, is that the type of gun that someone would really use on themselves? I mean, is that just one of those common sense things to me? What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
When I was a prosecutor, I'd have to respond to apparent suicides to investigate with the police whether or not they were really suicides or homicides. And this is so inconsistent with any suicide I've ever seen or heard of, where she's in bed with the covers on her. As you said, this gun that's used to kill her doesn't seem like the type that she would use. Also, there's a fire that started in at least a couple of spots. There's accelerant in a lot of different places in her house. That with her kids are still inside. Then she calls, supposedly, this defendant and asks him to come up and get the kids out of there and help them. It's so inconsistent with what we see in real suicides. Plus, there's all that evidence we talked about showing that he was learning about forgery the day before, that he had, according to Vashti, told her that he might kill her and burn the house to cover it up. This is what friends testified she had told them before this incident happened. So there's so much evidence going against this defendant here.
Yeah, and you've laid a lot of it out there. But the defense in the midst of their case, and a big part of it could be Brett Seacat himself taking the stand. You had just mentioned the forgery. I'm going to read the suicide note again, and that's what's at issue here in a lot of sense. The defense case that she committed suicide, and here's the note. Prosecution will say, no, he was working on forging documents, and this is it. Well, here it is. Brett, I can't do this. I can't fight this out. Take care of our boys. Be sweet to Brendan. Talk to Branson. Hold them both and tell them Mommy loves them every night. I'm taking care of the house. Brendan, you are so wonderful. Mommy's so proud of you. Be a good big brother. And then Branson, stay strong and don't ever lose that smile. I love the two of you and we'll be watching over you from heaven. So how much more are we going to hear about this suicide note in this case, you think, Dan?
I think it's the crucial piece of evidence here, because if she really did write a suicide note right before this incident, then he probably will be found not guilty. But if he forged a suicide note right before she is killed, then of course he'll be convicted. This is a powerful piece of evidence. And let's remember, he is at work the day before she is killed working on forging documents, and he has cards written by her at his desk while he's doing that. So the fact that right after he's practicing forging documents, this suicide note comes out where the prosecution expert says it was forged, that's really powerful evidence for the prosecution.
Yeah, you're building that mountain there that this defense is trying to climb, Dan. All right, we're going to stay on top of this. Again, Brett Seacat could take the stand any moment. We'll have it for you and bring you all the highlights from inside that courtroom in Kansas as a husband, former cop, faces these murder charges, killing his wife, Vashti. Dan Schorr's back with us, former prosecutor, a great attorney. Dan, 5 hours after this happens, wife's dead. 5 hours later, he's calling the marriage counselor, and he needs advice and uses the term, I killed her, it's my fault. Goes on to say, you know, it's her fault that she committed suicide. But still, he's calling. But it's his demeanor that caught the marriage counselor's attention, how matter-of-fact he was.
The marriage counselor thought it was strange that she reached out to him, that he reached out to her right away so soon after this.
Right.
One other thing about the statements he made coming out of the house, he says there's blood everywhere, and he tells the police later that he actually tried to pick her up, but he couldn't get her out of the house. Yet when he comes outside, there's no blood on him. So that seems to really undermine his story that he sees her, she's shot, there's blood everywhere, he tried to pick her up, failed to help her, and then ran out of the house with the kids. If there's blood everywhere, why isn't there any blood on him?
Yeah, and you look at the photo, Steve Cardian, real quick. You know, his hands, no real injuries, no blood, his arms, you think he'd be singed everywhere in the midst of some fire.
Yeah, based upon a gasoline fire is rapid moving, and it's very hot very quickly. So you certainly would believe, if he was telling the truth, that there would be evidence that he walked through it.
Got it. Okay, we're going to stay on top of this. Brett Seacat could take the stand. We'll have it for you as we update you on every piece of information coming out of that courtroom in Kansas. Stay with us. And here's where we are up to the minute. That's a volunteer firefighter who worked the scene as Vashti Seacat was dead inside of their home. Again, the second floor up in flames. It was an inferno as we saw those images. The two little boys, 4 and 2, out of the house safe and sound. And at the end of the day, Brett Seacat charged with murdering his wife, Vashti. We have our experts with us. Daniel Schorr's with us, former prosecutor, great attorney. Also with us, Steve Cardian, former police detective and law enforcement analyst as well. All right, Steve, let me start with you. As this case is unfolding, best bet for the defense, is it Brett Seacat being a convincing witness at the end of their case?
I'm sorry, one more time, Mike.
You think, is the defense's best bet the defendant taking the stand, Brett Seacat, and being a convincing witness?
Right now, him taking the stand and him producing, doing a good job, being convincing, being emotional, being compelling, I think that's the only way we're going to see a reversal or a turnaround in this case.
Dan Schorr, let's get your take on that as well, because we know that, this guy, law enforcement, 7-hour interrogation, he can talk, he potentially could be a good witness. Your thoughts on that?
It's certainly their only hope at this point in the trial, because there's so much evidence suggesting that he planned out this killing and committed a murder that you would think would have to take the stand and give his version of events. However, he's going to be subject to a very rigorous cross-examination where he's confronted with all of these facts, the alleged statements that he made about killing her and burning the house to cover it up, the PowerPoint presentation that's in the house that talks about fires and suicides and murders and how fires can cover up evidence. Of course, the fact that he was practicing forging documents the day before, and there's more beyond that. So it's going to be a tough cross-examination for him, but it might be his only hope.
Yeah, and on that front, and we've heard him, Dan, I'll say with you in that interrogation, and Steve talked about it, that high-pitched voice. No, did you do this? Did you do that? And he's screeching there. Would you be concerned if you're his attorneys that he may lose it? He may get a little volatile on the stand.
Well, in that situation, he's being questioned and accused of murdering his wife. So if he is not guilty, of course he's going to be very emotional. He just lost his wife, and now he's being accused of killing her. So I think that's understandable. When he testifies at trial, he'll definitely be prepared for his attorneys. They'll do mock directs and mock cross-examinations. He is law enforcement, so he's probably testified before as a police officer. This will be much tougher, but you would expect him to be prepared.
Okay. And again, we've had key testimony just over the past couple of days. The defense started their case. Brett's half-brother, Robert, taking the stand, talked about numerous things. Brett's demeanor as he began to be questioned about this. Also, he testified that Vashti Seacat was depressed a week before her death. Here again, Brett Seacat's half-brother, Robert.
When you had this conversation, where was Mrs. Seacat?
She was sitting on the floor of the living room.
Doing anything in particular?
Just sitting.
Did you find this to be typical of her behavior?
I thought it was not typical.
Based on your experience, what did you think?
I thought she was just much more withdrawn and quiet than usual.
In fact, can you describe her demeanor for the jury?
She acted depressed. She looked like she'd lost a great deal of weight, looked sleepy, and acted depressed.
You're certainly not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or even a clinical social worker, right?
In no way whatsoever.
So when you call her as acting depressed, you're using what, layman's language?
Layman's terms, that she was not herself.
Not herself.
All right, let's get Dan and Steve to weigh in on that. Steve, I'll start with you. So here's the brother saying she's depressed. That's the cornerstone of their case, that she's depressed and committed suicide. Is he convincing, or are they just kind of getting that one out there for the jury?
Well, we have to weigh the fact that he is his half-brother. So going into that Depression can be seen in so many different forms. In all my years in law enforcement, it presents itself in so many different ways. It's actually hard to pinpoint two depressions in two different cases.
All right. Dan, weigh in on that. Is that powerful for the defense, or just planting a seed with the jury?
It's certainly an important point that they have to make, but remember, she was having trouble. She was seeing a counselor. She was going through a divorce, so there's reasons why she would be acting upset, especially around his family. It's a long way to go from her seeming depressed and seeming withdrawn to being actually suicidal, which so far there's absolutely no evidence of.
Yeah. No one is saying that at this point, other than brother and also Brett Seacat himself. Again, that's testimony from Kathleen Mason Morton, integrated medicine specialist. Daniel Schorr, I mean, is this a strong area for the defense? You know, to show the boxes and that she's on this hormone diet, potentially?
It's not very strong for them. They're trying to show that she took this diet helper and somehow that made her depressed or contributed to her depression, and that might have led to her suicide. But they're a long way from getting all that into evidence, and even if they succeed in getting that argument in front of the jury, it's not very credible to explain all the evidence here. I mean, was she really driven in part by this supplement to kill herself? And she wrote a suicide note that, according to the police expert, looks forged the day after her husband, the defendant, was practicing forging documents. That's a hard thing for the jury, I believe, in the end to accept.
Yeah, and more people will say that she was happy and looking forward to life. She was exercising and eating healthy and losing weight, and she was just looking forward to the next chapter in her life without Brett Seacat. So we're going to continue to follow this. Again, trial is ongoing. Brett Seacat could take the stand. We expect him to. And when that takes place, we'll take you inside that Kansas courtroom and have more in a moment. Stay with us.